All right. Hello and welcome everyone to another episode of Letter of Law Interviews. My name is Sarthak Bharadwaj, and in the 10th episode of this interview series, I'm absolutely delighted, thrilled, and honored to be in conversation with none other than Mr. Bharat Chugh. I have wanted to feature Sir on the podcast for as long as I can remember now. And I think the 10th episode, which is sort of like a little milestone in Letter of Law's journey, is perhaps the best time to do this episode with Sir. Before we proceed any further, Bharat Sir, thank you so much for taking the time out and being here with me today.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for those kind words. I'll try to measure up.
uh, right. So usually, the very first question that I ask my guests is to introduce themselves a little bit. But I think that question for you is a little purposeless. Your journey is quite well known, and so is your story. So I'd ask a slightly different question to you. I'd ask you to reflect on your life as a lawyer, then as a judge, then as a corporate lawyer, then again now as an independent counsel. Um, and all of everything in between. What have been some of the turning points that you think have brought you to this point today?
Oh, that's a tough question. I mean, talking about yourself with a certain amount of objectivity is never easy. You sort of end up exaggerating your role in your limited successes, and you try to mitigate liability by writing off your failures as not attributable to you in some ways. But I'll try to marshal the facts as they are. Uh, Reflection upon oneself is not easy, as I said. Uh, as you said, I mean, have had the great fortune of dabbling with a lot of different things the last 9 years, 10 years that I've spent at the profession. Started off, of course, as somebody, and I used to like the, and I used to, and I love to describe it, as in the context of soccer, where I've been somebody who's sort of looked at the game from the outside, wanting to be a judge, wanting to be a lawyer, from the sidelines. I've been somebody who's been a player as a young lawyer. I've been somebody who's been a referee as a judge, calling out people on fouls and bad moves and bad faith and sort of decided disputes on the field. Again, in my interactions with young people wanting to be judges and people who are serving as young judges at various judicial academies across the country, I've had the opportunity of also being a teacher or a coach of sorts. So from somebody who's a spectator on the sidelines to a player to a referee to a coach, I've looked at all of these things. My mom loves to call me the jack of all trades, who can't really decide what he wants to be in life. Uh, but yes, having done all of these, there are a few insights. I like to think of them as insights that I've been able to gather of the different roles. Uh, and talking about judgeship or talking about practicing law at 21 is where it started. In fact, my brush with law started much before that. In fact, I started going to courts very early on in life. Father was a lawyer who started off at Tisazari. In fact, started off not as a lawyer from Tisazari, but as somebody who was a stenographer at Tisazari, a typist who used to operate out of this small stall in Tisazari, typing out people's affidavits, getting things attested, and then he took up law in the evening batch of law center at the Delhi University and became a lawyer and led a very tough life. My father, they were refugees from Pakistan who came to Delhi, India at the time of partition. Had my father had a lot of younger siblings to take care of, a lot of financial difficulties, but he somehow made it, became a lawyer, struggled a lot. And what motivated him to be a lawyer is interesting, and that's where I try to dip in from time to time to draw inspiration and to realign my moral compass, so to speak, from why he became a lawyer. He became a lawyer because he'd seen injustice, he's seen powerlessness, he's seen what does it mean to not matter in life, not to have any social capital, not to have any connections, not to have an understanding of how the system works, and how do you survive in a system like that, where everyone's out to get you, where you don't have redress to the monstrous injustices that you face in your life. So he was somebody whose house was taken away by the land mafia, and he briefed a lawyer, put together all the family savings to brief a lawyer who failed to show up in court. And my father and all his younger siblings, they lost that house that they had. And that's where he decided to use law as an instrumentality to help others and not just himself. First, of course, to defend himself and his family, because he was fiercely protective of his uh, the brood. And then, of course, to use the power that it gives you, the legitimacy that it gives you, to ensure that it doesn't happen to other people and make a positive difference. That's why dad took up law. He became a lawyer very late in life because of all the things that he had to do to get there. And it was his desire to see me start off from the very same court, but as a judge, where he started off as a typist. So I started studying for judgeship because of this, amongst a few other reasons. So dad had a good practice, but he fell sick, and sometime in 1995, I was 6 years old. He had a brain hemorrhage and a paralysis, and after that, the law office was a very small one. It was him, a clerk, and possibly a junior, and things were difficult to sustain after that. I started pitching in. My elder sister started pitching in wherever we could. We would type out his drafts as he dictated. We couldn't afford, a full-time stenographer, and I started going to courts with him. I still remember. Sometimes I would go after school as somebody was 10, 11, 12. Try to listen in on client conferences, also tag along when he went to the court, and look at him argue in court, and doing all sorts of things. And the things remained difficult. And at 13, 14, I decided that I'm sorry if I'm, sort of meandering.
No,
And
please go ahead. That's the whole point of a podcast.
okay. So 13, 14 is when I decided that my schooling was a needless expense on the family, and I could be doing other things with my time. I was obviously helping dad, and I was really liking it, the hustle of life, or getting to support your family in some way or the other. And I always found school to be a bit juvenile, and purposeless, with how it taught you to think in a rut and be a conformist, and homogenize knowledge and understanding and everything. So I and not an advice to other people. Formal education has its upsides and is important. You should get those first principles. But I didn't believe in it. And of course, I thought if I could support family and do the rest of my schooling from the open school, why not? And so I wanted to be out there. So I left schooling in 13, 14, I think. After 8th standard, I didn't do ninth. I did the 10th standard from the open school. Started teaching people computers, started designing websites for people around me, small businesses in my lane. I remember Ishwar Taylor, who was a tailor where we used to live in that 1 BHK DDA flat. So we had a tailor called Ishwar Taylor in the street. I'll walk up to him and say, "Why don't you have a website?" And this was like in the early 2000s, and you should have a website. It would help you reach out to a wider audience. You may get orders from across the world. You will be big very, very soon. You should get a website. And so I would pitch my ideas to all of these people, and they were service providers who would give you a domain name for free.
Yeah.
I would get the domain name for free and a limited hosting of 25 MB for free, and I would convince these small businesses around me to set up a website, which they would print on their boards and their visiting cards, which I'm sure a grand total of 10 people visited in the last 10 years. And I don't think they got a lot of orders from US, and all of those turned out to be pipe dreams. But yes, I got to make a website for them, and I remember making 3,000, 4,000 rupees, which is a princely sum back in the day. You're making websites, assembling computers, teaching people English, doing odd jobs, making affidavits, drafting agreements, all of those things. Had a great time, could support the family, and learn a few things. Of course, I was very, very conscious that I wasn't going to school. So I was losing out on some important skills. I'm sure school taught something, at least. I wasn't totally deluded so as to think schools were a total waste of time. So I also wanted to learn things, right? Not just engage in these enterprises of mine. So I started using the public library as a substitute for schooling. Couldn't afford too many books. Sometimes we would go to Daryaganj on a Sunday. Daryaganj is a market
Oh
in
yeah,
Delhi,
yeah. I've
and
been
pick
there.
up books by the kilo. Oh, you've been
Yes,
there.
it's
So
shutting down now
sometimes we would,
apparently.
yeah. That's very, very sad. So sometimes we would go there to pick up books by the kilo. Um, I also had the membership of this place called the Delhi Public Library, which would offer you 2 years of membership for 50 paisa,
Wow.
which was phenomenal. And
Yeah.
so if you go to them with 1 rupee, they would ask you to get it changed, and only 50 paisa is what they accepted. It was remarkable. This was, I think, 2003, 2004, or 2002, and I started going there and studying. Of course, it was important for me to be good at language, be good at a basic understanding of the world, a basic understanding of social sciences and how institutions worked. And because I could see that there wasn't much privilege or social capital that I had at my disposal, or money. All that you had, or in fact, for the profession of law, all that you needed was yourself, right? You should know something that the other person doesn't, and then come out with a solution, come out with, being the voice for that person who doesn't have a voice. So all the investments were essentially internal. You didn't need external capital. It was all about what you knew. It was all about what you could say and how you could convince. Understood that this is a knowledge based. Always wanted to be a lawyer or a judge. There wasn't a question about it. Not because it was chosen for me and dad was there. I really liked it. I liked arguing. I liked the nasty kid. I'm surprised my parents didn't disown me back in the day. Uh, so it was extremely argumentative, sometimes for no reason. Always wanted to challenge structures and the powers that be. At one point, my dad was scolding me for something, and I told him to go fight somebody his own age because it was an unfair contest. Your dad screaming at a 6-year-old. So threatened my school principal that I'll sue her for defamation because she asked me in front of the whole class to get up and go. And I thought this lowered me in the estimation of my right thinking school classmates. And I thought I had a reputation that I could protect at 6, 7. Later, I didn't file that case because my dad, as it turns out, was the legal advisor for the school.
Oh.
So why would I take on against my dad?
Yeah.
There may be pocket money implications of that decision. So, so that's the that's where I come from, and started working alongside. Did the rest of my schooling through Open again, and I knew that would sort of hold me back when I'm looking for a job, because the National Open School is essentially for dropouts.
Oh.
And I didn't have anything to show for what I'd learned except the way I understood the world or what I said. Uh, then went to Jamia. More than anything else, the reason for going to Jamia was that the open school results came very, very late. It's not like CBSE or ICSE. They come late. And by that time, there were no other forms that I could fill. I didn't want to waste a year. Another reason for going to Jamia was, apart from the reputation and everything, was you could study law for a year there, I think for 1,500 bucks or 1,000.
Wow.
So it was very, very cost effective. And it was Delhi. So I didn't want to be away from family because dad needed me, everyone needed me. And by that time also, 2006, when I joined law, by that time also, I had a bunch of people who trusted me with their legal issues, who sort of, looked out to me for solutions and for assistance and all of that. And this used to make me feel very big at such a young age. When people are not making decisions for themselves, I'm making decisions for them. And it was a very narcissistic way of, looking at things. But it made me matter, quote unquote. So those were the decisions. Great time at Jamia for 5 years. Wasn't a spectacular student ever. Was always more interested in the university of life and the school of adversity and hustle. Ended up doing a lot of work for 5 years, for legal aid, helping people out with their legal problems, and did only one internship in 5 years. Not that I recommend that to other people, but I was too busy in my own clientele, in my own world, to be learning. But then again, if I could go back in time, I'll possibly intern more and learn more. Did a lot of mooting though. and reading. And then at the end of 5 years, sort of started studying to be a judge, and then took the exam, and so on. I think I'm really, really meandering here. I just realized I can totally have a conversation with myself.
I think that's a great quality to have, especially in the times of lockdown where people are all alone. But anyway, I'd give this conversation a bit more direction then. Um,
Yeah.
you talked about how you chose to learn at the school of life. I was reading your articles on your website also, which attest to that fact, and of course, this entire conversation. And I'd like to know your opinion on something that's happening right now in the judicial world. That is, there's a concept being mooted that for candidates who wish to write the judiciary's exam, perhaps a 2-year buffer period where they have to practice will be made mandatory before they can finally write the exam. Now, as someone who has learned at the school of life, do you think that this 2-year experience is actually important? And you've been a judge also. So what's your take on this? Do you think this 2-year period is important, or it shouldn't happen?
It's a complicated issue. I personally think that the system as it stands is working out well. Uh, if we go back a few decades, there was a requirement of a practice of 2 years or 3 years before you came on to judicial services as a magistrate or a civil judge. But that was done away by the Supreme Court, because it was felt that for you to be able to draw talent and dedicated people who've always wanted to be judges and who thought like judges, who've studied to be judges, like a like a proper cadre of such people who are committed to the cause of judgeship, would be better attracted if you do not insist on a practice requirement. And I personally, having interacted with judges over the last few years, both at the academies and outside the academies, I've seen some of these law students decide very, very early to be a judge, and they're very committed, and they've spent time and effort on building those skills which a judge needs: skills of judgment writing, objectivity, thinking like a judge, problem solving, and they spend time, whether with the assistance of any coaching institution or by themselves. They're committed, and the quality sometimes is fantastic. Does practical experience of courts help? Of course, it does. Any sort of experience helps. But should it be a condition precedent? I don't think so. Because you'll have to remember the 1 year that you spend at the Judicial Academy right after you clear the exam
Yeah.
makes you sit with existing judges, makes you do simulation exercises, mock trials. And most of these things play a great role in sort of equalizing that, experience deficit if some people have it. And I've seen, judges across the country who are fantastic at what they do, and they are very, very idealists. Young people who become judges at 23, 24, 22, who became judges for the right reasons, who wanted to be judges, and they served so well without having ever seen the face of a court before they came to the judiciary and got selected. That's one reason. Another thing that one needs to bear in mind when discussing the requirement of 3 years, 2 years practice is the fact that if you've spent 3 years practicing law, sometimes if you're doing well, you may not want to come to judicial services also. So for you to be able to catch people young and attract them to an attractive career option, and groom them as judges, that grooming is very important, because that young bright law graduate that you've got who's entered into the service, who you've trained as a judge from day one, sometimes is very, very effective at delivering that role and doing justice to it. So I think it's working fine, and there's no reason for us to rethink it at the moment.
Great. Another question, sir, which when I, told my friends in law college that, hey, Bharat sir is going to be on the podcast, everyone said that if you do not ask this question, we're going to thrash you when the world reopens. And that is, given that there's so much happening right now in law school, there's so many places that people can choose to work as an intern. So, and of course, as an intern, as a third, fourth year law student, a student obviously does not know the entirety of the law. I wonder if even experienced lawyers can claim to say that they know everything about the law. So when you get an intern in your chambers, what is your expectation from them? What do you expect that an intern should be able to do, and what do you want that the intern should take from you during the course of the internship?
That's an interesting question. Uh, I think more than anything else, what I'm looking for in an intern or an associate or a senior associate for that matter is curiosity, is drive, is hunger, and not for anything else, not for material possessions and making it big and having a glamorous life and making a lot of money. Not that. Wanting to know things, wanting to figure out things, wanting to know more and more. And I think that's, if you have that, if you have that zeal to sort of learn and be better, and you're passionate about the subject, I think that's very, very important, because sometimes the demands that this profession makes on you is going to be hard. The work hours are going to be punishing. My mom used to call me a part-time family member for the longest time. So in all of that, if you're not passionate about the subject, you'll be miserable first yourself and not be able to give your best. So that drive, that passion, that zeal to know and learn is absolutely important. I mean, there may be people who may differ in their abilities of aptitude or language or writing skills, but if this central uh, 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 characteristic is there, that sort of takes care of most of the other things. And of course, when I practice law, a lot of emphasis in my chambers is on writing well, is on researching, is on being a think tank of sorts, because we are not just happy with the law as it stands. In every case, or in most cases, we're looking for an opportunity to push it, the frontiers of law, and to be able to contribute something meaningful to the discourse, to the judgments, to the propositions we argue. We don't like to do too much and spread ourselves too thin. To choose our cases well and do them well. That's important for me. So language is very, very important. Writing skills are important. Also, a zeal to sort of give back is also very important, because what I'm trying to do here is to um, run a chamber where we cross subsidize a lot, where we take up commercial matters, and I like doing them. I've done a lot of arbitration, white collar crime defense over the last few years, where we take them and do them well, of course, and also take out a good part of our time to take up causes which really matter, and not just causes which sort of make the headlines, like public interest litigations. For instance, a motor accident claim that nobody cares about or nobody is going to know about. Take up those cases on an individual basis and do justice to those briefs. And because we also do commercial matters, we are able to sustain that model and give back and take up pro bono matters as well. A lot of what I'm doing is still a work in progress, but that's the idea. So somebody who's looking to join me should not just be fascinated with being a mercenary of sorts or a mouthpiece of the corporates. You should also understand at the end of the day that it's social engineering involved. There's it's important for you to be a voice to people who don't have it, and give back, contribute to lawmaking, contribute to policy, contribute to right causes while you're here. Of course, while taking up things across the board. And also for somebody who's joining me, and I think this is where I'll stop. You should like law as a subject. I don't like to either pigeonhole myself or pigeonhole the people that I choose to work with. So it's not that I'll just do tax or I'll just do criminal law. That's it. No, the idea is to be able to do criminal law, constitutional law, commercial litigation, arbitration, and things across the board. And I found most of these, the eternal principles or the underlying principles which connect these different subjects are the same. One subject teaches you so much about the other. And if done rightly, of course, not taking on too much, if done rightly, a practice that's as diverse and as general uh, can help not only bring out your best to the matters that you work on, also to yourself as people, because doing the same kind of work over and over again is not good for anyone's professional growth, including mine, but more importantly for somebody younger who's working with me. Because if you're just specializing in one thing. You're standardizing those processes, doing the same things over and over again. You're not pushing yourself to look at a newer area of law, and that's not good for an an all-round growth of your personality as a jurist or as somebody who thinks about law and likes to engage with it. So yeah, this is my vision of what I'm looking for, or what we intend to do with this.
In fact, to all our viewers, there's a very interesting post Sir wrote on his website where he has written, if you're considering applying to his chambers, what you should, be writing in the mail, what you should not be writing. And that made for a very interesting read. And I love, Bharat sir, how you're able to make something as mundane as a call for interns so interesting to read. Uh, moving forward, sir, and this is something that I'm personally really curious to know about. Poetry and literature, I think, have played a really central role in your life. I've seen you recite poems on Instagram, which I love, by the way. I have recited a poem by you, T. Seller and the Judge, which incidentally is one of the most viewed videos on the channel. So do you think, sir, that your time as a judge and now as a lawyer, does writing poetry help you be a lot more reflective? Does it give you that pause that's needed to think about issues more deeply and then come to a decision? What's your take on that?
That's a great question. I think poetry and literature, of course, to me, they've always been about otherness, for want of a better term. It's your ability to walk out of your skin and walk the town in somebody else's. That's been literature for me. I got drawn towards literature because of number one, wanting to escape the banality of my own life. Sometimes, you could be living in a tenement, a 1 BHK Janta flat where you can't study in peace because there's so much noise around you. But you could still mentally transport yourself to a library somewhere at the other end of the world by reading a book about it. You just have to stuff your ears with earbuds and wear a monkey cap because there was no noise cancellation back then, and take up a book at an ungodly hour and be transported to wherever you wanted to be and be whoever you wanted to be. So that was how literature started for me, wanting to escape, as bad as it sounds, from wanting to escape from my own. And then, of course, I realized that words are important. These are the only stock in trade for a lawyer, and I want to be good at it. And what better than reading? And that's what drew me to literature. Then I realized that there's nothing that teaches you more about compassion and empathy and what I called the feeling of otherness than books. And legal profession, not just judgeship, is all about understanding otherness, right? It's about understanding your client. It's about understanding the opposite party. It's about understanding the judge and where he comes from. It's about understanding the opposite counsel. It's about understanding the lawmaker. It's about understanding the other person. So, and reading, you can read a book about somebody in Afghanistan and be that person. You can read about being a refugee in some other part of the world and be that person. You could be a dictator. You could be somebody who was in a concentration camp somewhere and read about their experiences and draw from their experiences. So I like literature for that reason. And judgeship is more intimately connected and affected by literature more than anything else, because again, when you're sitting there, you're trying to uh, understand and look at a problem or the world or decisions that people take from their standpoint. Reading helps. The sheer number of people that you've been by reading gives you that emotional elasticity, or that ability to transport yourself and not be yourself and rise above yourself. One of the most important parts of being a judge is to get out of your own experiences, your philosophies, your ideologies, your experiences, your friendships, your foes, your emotions, your own thoughts. As I say, sometimes a judge sits like a blank slate, tabula rasa, right? So reading helps you do that. That's the reason I advocate that. Poetry is, again, it's even more intense that way, because it forces you to think, it forces you to reflect, it forces you to take a step back, it forces you to reevaluate. concepts and feelings, and it forces you to distill all that you've learned in your life. It's almost like the scales falling off your eyes, when you're writing poetry. Sometimes you're forcing yourself to sort of squint and look at things clearly, and then take your glasses off, and then clean the lens, and just forcing yourself to do all of that. And I think and it's been that trying to make sense of what situations people are in,
Yeah.
and also catharsis, a vent of because judgeship, sometimes if you are sensitive and you're responsive, and if you if you're alive and kicking and you have a moral compass intact, then it's difficult, because some of these decisions would affect you. Why did I send that man to jail? Was I right in doing that? What about his future? Now nobody's going to hire him because I sent him to jail. I sentenced that person for 3 years. What would happen to his family? Should I have given him the benefit of doubt? I asked this poor family to vacate their house in the slums, and asked MCD to go ahead and demolish the whole thing, which is something that you do as a civil judge. These things would keep you tossing and turning, and difficult decisions. You are taught to be sensitive, but at the same time not emotional about it, because you can't do it with a shivering hand, right?
Yeah.
So you have to have that clinical detachment when you're deciding. But that clinical detachment takes, of course, a toll on you emotionally, and there are different ways of dealing with it. People sometimes get too stressed. The only way I could deal with it, apart from, of course, discussing things with my peers and having, a strong support system in the form of very good friends who bear with me and my antics. Uh, I also started writing, yes. So on some of the difficult decisions, I took to poetry, and just wanting to express the dilemma, express the conundrum, express the difficulties of making a decision, and also transporting myself, because some of the decisions that I made, I wouldn't be able to make them had I not eh, done that exercise of compassion and empathy. For instance, you read that poem that I wrote on the tea seller issue. You've in fact read it better than I ever could, you know. And thanks for doing that.
Thank you.
You added so much to the text. So when I decided those cases of tea sellers, whether they should be punished or not, young men who do it out of necessity, if I so these orders were being passed for a very long time. People were being fined, all these young people, and not many people took a step back to think, where do they come from? What is the story behind those tattered clothes? What is the story behind this young guy who's standing before me? What was he doing in his village? Why did he end up selling tea when he could be doing something else with his life? No profit margins, police is harassing them every day, they are being prosecuted. So why did he do it? And then when I tried reading about it, uh, then I ended up writing it. So just to answer your question and circle back after this very, very long detour, is it's forced me to think more clearly. It's forced me to be more compassionate and be more empathetic, and to identify the quality of otherness. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that really reflective answer. And I mean, staying on the topic of poetry, to all our viewers, there's a beautiful poem Sir wrote. I think it's available on his website. I forget the name, but it has to do with the experiences of roadside dustbin and everything that that little thing sees. And Sir has crafted such a beautiful, beautiful poem from that. I'll link that poem in the description section, so be sure to check that out. So moving towards the final set of questions with which we can conclude. Um, Staying on the subject of literature, you're clearly a marathon reader. I've seen your book reviews. I've taken your book reviews. In fact, I read Humankind based off of your recommendation, and I loved that book. So if you were to give some book recommendations to our viewers right now, and also talk about some of the books that you think have been really influential in your own life.
Right. I don't read, nearly as much as you cut it out to be. I wish I could read more. Books have, of course, been a very, very important part of life. I've read eclectically. I've
Yeah.
tried making a conscious effort to read across genres, just to sort of pick up again the zeal to understand otherness and try to look at a situation from as many perspectives as I can. Also, there is a certain amount of insecurity behind me wanting to read so much and read so eclectically. That's again the absence of a conventional schooling. And somewhere in my head, I still think that there is there is a I'm at a loss because I possibly didn't learn as many things. But as long as this insecurity sort of drives me to read more, I think the net result is good. Coming back to the books that have sort of inspired me, I think one book that's very good, which I've read and reread, is How to Read and Why by Harold Bloom. Uh, we sort of think of reading as something that you just pick up a book and read, but Harold Bloom tells you that there is some method to all of this madness, and the kind of books that you can read, the genres you should explore, and for what reasons, and how to take the max that a book has to offer. And life is short, life, you can read only a finite amount of books
Yeah.
in the world, so you have to choose them carefully. The books that have I've read Bill Bryson, The Short History of Nearly Everything was a very interesting book, one of my favorites, where in 300-400 pages, Bill Bryson talks about millions and millions years of history and writes so well. I've been hugely influenced by Bill Durant's Story of Philosophy. He's a fantastic. I don't think we have anyone else who's interpreted and looked at the world so clearly. Philosophy has been one of the earliest categories that I got really hooked to, wanting to understand life better. And I think it's a coming of age thing where you're drawn to philosophy and the finer things of the mind.
In fact, sir, if I can just pitch in here, I saw your Instagram story just today. I think you posted a quote by Seneca, if I'm not wrong. In fact, and I've read Seneca's book, and you're right. Philosophy, reading that helps really really coming of age kind of thing. You're right on that. Sorry, please go ahead.
Yeah,
sir.
yeah. No problem. And there was another quote which is one of my favorites, that if you read philosophy, then or the finer things of the mind, then all your needs are either supplied or their loss or absence is not felt. So either you would get all the things that you need in life by reading philosophy, or you wouldn't feel the absence of any of those, because you'll be rather self-sufficient in what you have, or at least have your considerations right. I just recently got a friend very kindly gifted me The Story of Civilization, which is Bill Durant's contribution. It's 11 volumes,
Wow.
subdivided into like 30 books.
Wow.
Each volume took about 5 years for him and his wife to write. And starting from the Greek civilization or the Oriental civilizations in Egypt till the 20th century, he's summarized. It's like civilizations and ages and millions of years, between covers. So that's again something I'm on to right now. I've spent a lot of time reading about decision making. So Daniel Kahneman and Thinking Fast and Slow.
I read that one.
The Art of yeah.
book.
So that's something I read when I was a judge, and I thought, it's since I make decisions, I should read about decision making and what tricks my mind is playing on me, and am I being as impartial and objective as I think I am. So thinking, behavioral economics, why do we make the decisions that we do, cognitive biases, fallacies, and so my judgeship period was when I really dived deep into these issues. Of course, fiction's been a constant throughout all of this, and I've Vikram Seth, Arundhati Roy. These have been some of my favorite authors. And I'm just looking at my book rack. Stephen Fry is one of my favorites. His trilogy on Greek mythology is fantastic. Stephen Hawking's Brief Answers to the Big Questions is something I read recently. Again, a great book. I've also recently developed a liking for biographies. So Walter Isaacson's biography of Leonardo da Vinci and Steve Jobs was quite fantastic. I loved reading about Da Vinci and how he always let the perfect be the enemy of the good, and focus on the big things in life. and had so many projects that he started off with but never finished because he was never happy
Yeah.
with how with the quality of his work product, and how he brought in different sort of disciplines together. For instance, if he's drawing a portrait which has a particular facial feature, he has to know the muscle behind it, and he must have dissected, some a lot of people who were obviously, there were wars, so he wasn't
Yeah.
actually murdering those people. So he would go behind the human anatomy in order to give a particular facial feature to a painting, and then his zeal for perfection was something that was found very, very inspiring. Murakami, a lot of things across the board, Malcolm Gladwell,
Oh, yes.
Taleb. I've
Oh, you've
spent
read
some
Nassim
time
Taleb.
reading these guys.
That's Nassim Taleb is one of, I mean, he's the thinker who has influenced, I think, the most. He has had the most influence in my life. I've read Anti-Fragile and Black
Yeah,
Swan so
yeah.
far. You've read
Black
all.
Swan.
You've read the
Yeah,
entire In Soto
I've
series.
read. I've read these two. I've read these two.
I'm currently reading
I've
Skin in the Game.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That's on my to read list, which keeps on mounting.
That's
So
good.
these have been broadly the transformative influences when it comes to reading.
Right. And I think with this really nice recommendation of a lot of books, I think we can finally come to a conclusion of today's talk. Bharat sir, thank you so very much for taking time out and being here with me. I wanted to do this for a very, very long time. Thank you so much for being here today. I'm so glad we got to do this.
Thank you so much for having me, and look forward to do a second part sometime
Oh,
soon, where we
yes.
just talk about books.
Yeah,
Yeah,
hopefully in person.
sure. I look forward to that. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.